On the Road with Kelly and Bob is brought to you by Mueller Metal Roofs and Buildings. Made in America, made to last. Coming up on this episode...
We use the same tools, the same mallets, same letters. I mean, we use the same 23 Roman letters from 400 BC that were developed. It's really magical. They're really just marks in the sand. They're abstract forms that we've given meaning to, and we take for granted that they are what we say they are. They are our great communication.
Hi, we're Kelly
and Bob Phillips, and we're on the perpetual road trip of America's back roads,
where the journey is always the destination. Hi, and thanks for joining us for this episode of On the Road with Kelly and Bob. I'm Kelly Phillips.
And I'm Bob Phillips. Today, Kelly, we're going to talk about a subject a lot of people don't want to ever talk about.
That's wide open. I mean, there are a lot of things people don't like to talk about.
Yeah, but this one is the biggie. The fact that humans are finite beings. We have an expiration date. We are not going to live forever.
Now I'm following you. And it seems how we handle the end of life can have something to do with where we are from.
Lots of us have been through the process. A close family member reaches their time without plans for how they want their finality to be observed. Suddenly, you might find yourself at a funeral home doing what they call making arrangements.
Yeah, picking out a casket, securing a burial plot, even deciding what your dearly departed will wear to the afterlife could be a part of that process. And while it all seems rather unimportant in the grand scheme of things, some people will tell you it's more about helping the ones who are left behind than it is about the one who has left this world.
How we handle death is as different as our personalities.
I do think people want to touch the earth, and they want to weep, and they want to wail, and they want to have an experience of grief. And we're a culture that's very quick to come in and sort of usher us through that process. And not to say that it's not difficult, but I do think it's made profoundly more difficult by not having conversations about it before someone dies. And so, yes, if your loved one dies and you haven't thought about what you want to do or how that affects your life or how you want to be remembered, then it is a shock. And it's not great.
Adam Paul Heller is someone who has given a great deal of thought to the human end of life, to the way we each react to death, to how we would like to be honored and remembered.
From the studio behind his house in Norfolk, Connecticut, Adam creates simple yet stunning grave markers in stone, using material that is mined from the earth and is sometimes millions of years old, along with a mallet, a chisel, and the knowledge he's accumulated over more than a quarter century of practicing his art. Adam carves out the proper place in history for his clients. I hate to say customer, because you're preparing their final resting place of where they're...
It's definitely a client relationship. It's a very special relationship. It's a very intimate relationship in some ways. It's such a specific part of life. And we are preparing the stone either for a loved one who has left, or for a couple or a person who knows they will die. And that's a very powerful moment. So people that find me, often it's late night Googling or word of mouth, or someone who they don't feel that an industrially produced stone is giving what they want as a memorial.
Make no mistake, Adam Paul Heller is a world-class artist. If you're picturing some crude carvings on rock or maybe a machine-made marker, you need to visit his website and see what he really does.
What you find there will be reminiscent of another place, another time. A reminder that Perhaps it's not who can scream the loudest, but whose work speaks volumes in a soft and dignified manner.
Adam has been on a journey to this point in time since his earliest days.
I was born in Westerly, Rhode Island, but I really grew up in the Western Adirondacks in a small hamlet. It was called Wanakina, New York. And it's really a very special, very beautiful, isolated little community in the Five Pond Wilderness area of the Adirondack Parks. So it's on a little river called the Oswegatchie, and there are about 150 people living there. And it's off of Route 3, which was expanded and modernized for the 1980 Winter Olympics. And that's about all there is. There's a little community of 8 villages and towns that made up a school. But it is still very rural, and it's stunning. It's really beautiful. It really informed my sense of space and life and rhythm in a huge, huge way. Yeah.
How so?
I think the silence is one thing. It's so intensely quiet. Like a different kind of quiet from just quiet. There is so little manufactured human sound. It's like a feeling. But that closeness to nature was a huge part of my life.
What about the silence? Do you still crave that?
I feel very comfortable with it. I definitely crave it.
After a series of artistic endeavors, including a trip to India where he studied religions other than that of his Protestant upbringing, Adam found himself working on his art at a monastery where he was guided by a sister at the Benedictine Abbey.
I was doing a lot of painting at the time, and she said, "Adam, you need to try carving stone." And so she took me under her wing and decided to introduce me to art from the very beginning. My first experience of carving stone was definitely an aha experience. I was like, oh, whatever this is, I love this.
I want to keep doing this.
I want to keep doing this. And so for me, I found that home in stone.
Were you not intimidated at first by stone?
I think it just drew me in. I think I was intimidated by the idea of it, but I think I could not believe how... I think in carving there's an experience of that energy of 400 million years being released as you interact with it. Perhaps that's a good way to describe it. So you're at once participating and releasing, and it's a, for lack of a better word, a somewhat divine experience. You're like, whoa, at the same time, and you can't describe it, and it's very beautiful.
What he does is terribly difficult, but the end result is beautifully simple.
Adam Paul Hiller carves gravestones, works of art that mark our passing from this world. And in doing that, he has found himself.
And it's a context for layers of grief and suffering that are normal to happen and to be held, and a place to talk about it. You know, we all, as much as our friends and loved ones want to be there for us, there's a limitation for how much a familial or community body can integrate the experience of grief. And I think as I've grown through this, I really understand that it's a totem. That's what a memorial is. It's a totem, and I am the in-between, between the grieving and the next world and the grief. And we have a process where we work together. So that's a very beautiful, profound part. It sounds almost trite, but it's so grounding. It's so grounding.
Notice that we didn't get into exactly how Adam Paul Hiller does what he does, the craft of his art, or the long journey he took to get where he is.
That conversation was at times pretty deep and thought-provoking, and maybe even a tad bit esoteric, at least to us, but very interesting.
For more on that, continue the conversation with us now.
My parents were city kids. My mom was from near New York, and my dad was from Pittsburgh. So they were, it was the 70s. They were trying something new. So for them, that was an experience. But for me, that was like my complete orientation to the world, and it was very intense. It was such an intense time in itself, right?
Right.
And that returning to roots into the land and exploring maybe different ways of living. If it was below 20 below in the winter, they would delay the school buses because of brake fluid, not because of students.
Brake fluid.
If it was below 20 below.
So we would have long stretches where that was the norm. It wouldn't get above zero for weeks. You know, and I think in an environment like that, what happens is that the natural world has a personality that you live with, you know, and that you respect. There's a lot of respect for that, and it becomes part of your life in a really natural, beautiful way. The night sky, the stars, the sounds of the lake, which would freeze to, you know, a couple of feet, and it shifts, and that makes these sounds at night.
Cracking, yeah.
You can hear the whole. It's amazing. I did university studies in Burlington, Vermont, which was like a city for me. I studied studio arts. I took a year abroad in Asia. I went to India. I had a lot of maturing to do, I think, within a modern context of society and understanding what art meant. And I was not ready for an immersion as a contemporary artist into what that would mean. I did not have the maturity for that. But when I went, I was fascinated to see how other cultures dealt with art and religion. And really, for me, that's like this deep interior silence that all peoples of humanity share, this reverence for whatever the mysterious thing is we call life. And everyone approaches it in a different way. And I think being in India really, really reset that for me outside of just my Western contemporary art context. And I was able to see religions I had no real familiarity with and how they incorporated art and beauty into this reverential, mystical realm. I left India, and there's a monastery here in Connecticut. My father had been in a relationship for a long time called Regina Lauderdale's Abbey, and they are a very traditional cloistered Benedictine abbey of nuns, and they offered a residency program for artists for 2 years. It's such an interesting community. They call it an order of the primitive observant, so they really wanted to go back to their own roots to discover what Benedictine monastics would mean now in a contemporary society. And Benedictines are really interesting, and they have a real reverence for the material world as a manifestation of also not just the creation, but how we as humans interact with this magical, mysterious world, and they have a real reverence for it. So they make their own cheese, they have cows, they have cream, they have fresh raw milk every day, there's a blacksmith shop. We made some chisels. Of course, it's a monastery. Monasteries are famous for collecting things, right? They have stability. It's in their vows, stability. They have boxcars actually on tracks. They don't go anywhere, they're welded, but they sit nicely on tracks. And under one of these boxcars is a collection of Italian Carrara marble, which is the coveted marble from around the world. So we grabbed some of these steps. We did some carvings, and that's how I started stone carving. That was probably 1998 that I first carved stone. And I went to see this beautiful stone shop, which the Benson family has run for 3 generations now. It was owned by the Stevens family for 7 generations prior to that. So in the 1930s, a man named John Howard Benson bought this little stone shop and became fascinated by calligraphy, hand calligraphy, brush lettering. And at that time, sandblasting, which is how most stone carving is done, 99.9% of everything that everyone sees in cemeteries now is sandblasted, which means a rubber template is made on a computer, and the computer font is basically cut out of this rubber template, and then forced air and sand is sprayed onto that, and wherever the template or lettering is not, becomes etched into the stone. It's a very quick process. It has a precision about it, has wonderful industrial applications. It is definitely not the same as hand carving something. And so John Benson was just really taken with this. He was really taken with how beautiful a hand-drawn letter is and how beautiful a hand-carved letter is. And he brought this shop back into this tradition of hand carving, took out the hoses. They still had a forge and a blacksmith shop. And he is really partly responsible for this humble but important return to hand carving in the United States. So I went to see the Bensons. I brought my little carvings. So John Howard's grandson, Nicholas Benson, was taking over the shop from his father, John Everett Benson, at the time. And they liked what I had to show, wondered if I'd like to come visit, maybe carve a little, see if an apprenticeship, internship would work, and then maybe I could come work there. But it was really intimidating in some levels also that it was all lettering. I thought I would be a sculptor. I was like, oh, I love stone, I'm going to be sculpting. And I went to see these very precise hand-carved letters with these like beautiful serifs that are like hair. They're unfathomably delicate and beautiful and refined. And I just was like, ooh, I don't know. So I did go back. Nick is a wonderfully gracious soul. And I was like, okay, I'm into this. So I lived above the stone carving shop. And that was really my immersion into the professional, both calligraphy and hand-carved stone.
What is it about that you love so much?
It is when we as humans are incredibly focused on something and it draws you into that relationship, everything else falls away. And that was my experience of carving stone. Like, to be in this zone, if we call this a stone zone, where literally after coming out of carving for an hour or a few hours, there's an experience of not being able to access even sometimes other parts of your brain, your verbal capacity.
Where did our culture of dealing with the end of life begin? I've always assumed it went back to the early Roman Empire, but I don't know. How did we get to where we are?
I'm not totally sure, but from a cemetery stone carving perspective, when as we call them, pilgrims came, they were very plain about death. And you go to the cemeteries, and for those of you not in New England cemeteries, there's the oldest stones we have is often just a skull, but a very primitive, it might just be a round face with eyes, and that kind of grew to like a death head with either a skull or sometimes later an actual somewhat effigy of a caricature of the person with wings. And if you read the epitaphs, they're very plain about the suffering of life and death and the realisticness of it. We're very plain about death. This is not a secret. This was a very religious society. They were very plain about heaven. They were like, live now, be a good person, because what's happened to me is going to happen to you. That's on the stone. That's what it says. And then the Victorian era comes, and it's a little more like, we made beautiful cemeteries, and there are plantings, and cemeteries are thought of as a place to like be and honor the dead and walk around. And so how that cultural expression takes place is different, but there's definitely, with the Industrial Revolution and with the loss of connection to the old world, there is a box store aesthetic that comes to our cemeteries. I do think our culture is perhaps due in a wider sense for a larger look and like integration of death as being a beautiful part of life. It's partly what makes life so beautiful is that it is finite. It's part of the humbling brutality of what it means to be human.
What does your work do for your soul?
It's been a beautiful gift for me. So I started really, in this classical training, university training, to be an artist and see what that is and what that means. For my soul, stone has given me this grounding to know how to participate in modern society as a human being and really be in it, be in these forms, these sculptural forms, these letters of communication that are a mode for communicating literature, these totems, afterlife. That's what it's done for me. And I think that will be as much or possibly more than this, in a way. My cultural contribution is coming through both those things, through these totems and stone and honoring of letters, and that I understand it in a way I never could understand. I didn't have the maturity. So I needed 25 years of interacting with 400 million year old material and working with grieving people to really begin to come into my own, which is just happening. So I'm not really sure what it's doing for my soul is it's grounded me. I'd love to give you a little tour. I think we'll start with this. So this was started in 2022. So we probably met in the summer of 2022. And these are for David and Natalie Hosford, who are locals. I call them my octogenarian lovebirds. So they were recently married in 2018, and this is in some ways a celebratory stone. This is a stone for the love that they found later in life. So it is also a memorial stone. It will have their dates, the date they're married, and then on the back there is also an inscription, which is quite beautiful. It's a quote by Emily Dickinson, that I did always love, I bring thee proof, that till I loved, I never lived enough. And there are these beautiful, bittersweet vines on each side of the front of the stone, that one of them creeps around to the back, and that's something that Natalie particularly is fond of.
And you're almost 3 years into the creation of this
Yes.
at this point
Yes.
while we're standing here.
You don't say, yes.
And you're such the eternal optimist, because I know in your initial drawing here, they were born in 1941, but you put 2099.
I think it would be bold of me to put anything at all, but for the sake of design, it's important to see dates. So, in fear of tapping too much into the mystical, magical realm of whatever things get written, I thought we should be optimistic.
Absolutely.
So these are two alphabets I pulled out to show you. So what happens, that little design, there's an iteration over here of basically a first sketch of the letters for the Hosford family, which was drawn, traced on this light paper, retraced on this. This will be a full scale of the stone that's downstairs we'll look at after. This is the actual size of the material.
This is
a rather large.
So it's 6 feet or so tall.
Yes, a foot will go into the ground. So that is lost so that it stands. But yes, it's a very big stone. So this is the second iteration of the letters, which will again, I will make minor adjustments for spacing. So one thing that is quite significant difference between colonial times and now is that we're a very visually saturated society. So if I was a stone carver 300 years ago, I might line the stone, chalk some things on there and carve it. And now we have a very sophisticated aesthetic, and so we use that. We honor that. That's the style of the time. So I bring the highest level of craftsmanship and visual, basically, sophistication that I can to this. We do these 2,000-year-old letters. So I'm brushing again here, and then I'll trace it, and that will be live brushed again on the stone downstairs, like this, which is what this is. I have a small, almost memorial-shaped stone. It's maybe 22 inches high by about 11 inches across. This is what we call a bead. I've made a V-cut channel around the stone, and then I've been rounding it over for the border, which creates this beautiful container for the letters, like a frame. This is unique to slate. The texture of this has been split from the mother block, and slate is unique that it makes this beautiful cleaved or natural cleft surface, we call. So when the chisel splits it, it goes pow, and literally the energy of it releasing from the other block is recorded in these marks on the stone, and it has these beautiful wavy, lightly textured marks on the slate. So this is very thin. Slate can be split to less than 1/4 inch for shingles and slates.
This is smooth.
Yes, so the piece on the left is a piece from Vermont, in the Champlain Valley of New York and Vermont. There's a geologically really interesting spot. It has green, red, purple, purple-green, and gray slate all within this 150-mile radius. Yeah, quite extraordinary. So this is what we call honed. This is a beautiful piece of green Vermont slate. And it's been oiled, so it's a little darker. The piece on the right is a black slate. So after letters are drawn, this on the right, this is how they are before they're carved. They're brushed on. These little serifs are made by the brush, which I'll show you. And then the carving, what's unique to the hand carving are this V channel, which is super refined, and these beautiful little, look how delicate these serifs are. And so this piece is actually meant to be hung on a wall, and I've used somewhat of a shaker style palette from early American shakers. There's these ochre yellows and oranges and subdued greens and beautiful deep blues. And I don't think I was necessarily conscious of it at the time, but when I look back, I'm like, oh, that's shaker colors. And it's really beautiful. So, and then this is my interpretation. This is maybe 20 years old, of one of the first alphabets I carved and designed myself. And this is more recent. And I've basically moved to more and more, I don't know how to say this. They're traditional Roman letters, but they have my flavor on it. But it's such a contemporary letter. I mean, these letters, it's a 2,000-year-old letter, and we just kind of take it for granted. But they hold up, and they look very modern.
So some of this is so delicate here. It's
Yes.
almost like a serif, or
Yes, this actually is the serif.
it is a serif.
That's a
So
serif.
That's got to be incredibly difficult to carve.
You don't have a lot of opportunities to return. This is it's a one-off for a serif that delicate. You really you carve it, and you may return to it once or possibly lightly a second time, but that's it. Yeah, this is for listeners about 1.25 inch, 1.5 inch letter, 1.5 inch, and the serif is about the size of a very sharp pencil lead.
Do you ever make mistakes?
Of course, but not enough for anyone to know about.
So you're the only one that's going to know.
Yeah. And I do think we're moving very slowly, like I am moving very slowly in this. So I think the process of making something so refined, what mastering a skill looks like is your interpretation of mistake becomes so narrow and so out of line and out of the universe for what any human outside of yourself looking at it can see, that there's nothing that you would register as that. But I do think every craftsperson struggles with that idea of a mistake, because you do have a vision and somewhat sometimes unrealistically of your own capabilities for perfection. But walking that line between your human touch and your concept is what makes something glow.
Have you made the perfect stone yet?
You know, I think, I'm a little worried about that, because like maybe when that happens, you just die, like you're just removed from the earth.
That's why I asked. There's
So
a
then,
fear.
No.
There's a fear of
Apparently
perfection.
not.
You're still doing it.
I think also, going back to that, the ideas of perfection and what those mean. I mean, there are stones I'm absolutely surprised and lovely, very satisfied with. Sometimes people's names and the number of letters in their names oddly really inform the design. Like they're perfectly lined up in a way that's absolutely delightful. And sometimes it isn't as successful as I would like. But again, outside of the realm of my own somewhat, harsh artistic critique, they're all have a life of their own that's very beautiful. I think it is that humans we're so beautiful, we can connect with everything, really be invested, like this is mine and I've done all this, but then removing yourself from it is actually, interestingly, perhaps more satisfying. Like it isn't just me, it's like now this thing has a life of its own. We recently installed a beautiful stone for a couple in Virginia, and I just, again, I haven't installed a stone yet this year, and there's an experience of leaving part of yourself there in the cemetery that's hundreds of miles away, and it's a little bit of like, it's a little grief moment, it's a little like, oh, there's a part of me there, a little child is there, I have to leave now.
You just dropped your child off at the first day of school.
Yeah, it has that feeling, and you're like, I'm leaving it here with the 3,000-pound lawnmowers and the seasons and the trees and the people, and
you have no control anymore.
It's not mine anymore, but it's fulfilling its purpose, and it can't be mine, and I can't keep them. And even though and maybe we learn to it's okay to honor that impulse, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Is out of the 26 letters, is there one that's the most difficult to do?
I do have to say, W's and M's are very difficult.
I knew you were going to say W. I didn't know about the M.
What's really the most difficult about them is that these, we call them junctions, and you can see this amount of stone here, and the W and the V, it's very fragile. Yeah. So what I do is I carve the largest stroke of the letter, and then you come back. But these, between here and here, it's fragile. It's a lot of work. This is basically 4 of these letters. So, a W is 4 eyes, or like, so you carve an O, for example, and you're just going around, and then around the other way and cleaning, and you never leave it. You never leave this track, if you will. But they're all satisfying in their own different ways. See, this U has no foot. This U has a foot. This is an alphabet I designed maybe 5 years ago that I haven't carved, but I've just been designing, and it's talking a little bit about the alphabet itself. Is what I've done is broken down. This is called a sans serif, so these are the serifs, and this has no serif, so sans is without. And I broke down every letter form to its simplest structure and imagined what it would be like for someone either stamping it in clay or on the beach. And we're starting with I, V, X. And if you look at those, which is also Roman numbers, interestingly, these are like the simplest lines a child could draw. And I think it's part of the magic of these letters that the Romans really codified this select group of 23. It would have been minus this and this.
Mm-hmm.
But
we added those. Yeah.
Yes. So
WJU.
for listeners, yeah, J, U, W, we're not part of the original Roman alphabet. So that's interesting. And one other piece I want to show you before we go downstairs is the tools we use for lettering. This is called a Roman chisel edge brush. It's a sable natural brush. And when it's dry, it just looks like any sort of paintbrush. But when ink is applied to it, you can, let's see, it's drawn out, we draw it out, and when the brush is loaded, it basically takes on the shape of a chisel, which is how these serifs are made.
It does. Look at that.
So here, I'll draw a letter on this stone for you with water. This is how, and the weight put on the brush and the release of the brush is what gives it these serifs. Enter, exit. And that's how the letters are drawn with a brush and ink. And then downstairs, we use the same form with steel. And that's how they're carved. These, I'm in my hand now, are the first tools I ever made. And these were made at Regina Loudis Abbey in Bethlehem, Connecticut.
And these are the ones that are made out of springs.
Yes, they were originally springs for a truck, I believe, and they have a high carbon content. There is a blacksmith at Regina Loudis I worked with, and I had been doing other things already, so I knew how to use the forge. I straightened the strings, and then this thing, we call it drawing out. It's basically the hot metal is drawn out into a thin chisel end, and then it's cold plunge, so it's just cold again. And then the metallurgy part, which is now changed, the tip of the chisel is put into the hot fire and it glows till it's glowing. Mm-hmm. And then it's plunged, so it's cooled. But this is still hot here. And the heat from this part of the chisel starts to emanate down back to the tip. So the tip's been cold. And there's a color coding that happens naturally in nature and metal. It's basically the rainbow colors. And as they go down, the rainbow colors show the different organizations of the molecular structure of the metal. So we'll say gold, purple, blue. For different types of stone, you want a different hardness for the chisel. So when it gets to the color you want, you cold plunge it again, it locks the crystals in place, and you have the chisel you want. Yeah, and so these are the mallets. The lightest one is upstairs. Most of it's done with a 1.5 pound mallet. This is, I believe, a 2 pound. And it's held in your hands like this.
Whoa.
So for you listening, it's round. It's not a hammer. And you hold a round handle so that, as I was taught, your master could come up behind you, pluck it out of your hands at any moment so that you can hold it all day. It's very relaxed. You're not gripping it hard. It's a very relaxed motion, very gentle with your wrist, and you go whack, whack, whack. And it's very satisfying. So it's a very ergonomics of it, well thought out.
It's like a dance, almost.
It's definitely a dance, and it's very rhythmic.
One thing I want to encourage our listeners to do, Kelly, is to visit Adam Paul Heller's website. Mm-hmm. This is one of those things you really do need to see to fully understand what it is that he does.
Yeah, and that web address is pretty simple, AdamPaulHeller.com. Now, Heller is Heller. Again, AdamPaulHeller.com.
Thanks for joining us for this edition of On the Road with Kelly and Bob. We hope you've enjoyed our visit with this Norfolk, Connecticut artist.
Be sure and follow On the Road with Kelly and Bob on Facebook and Instagram, and even on our YouTube page. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcast, or the best thing, just download that free Odyssey app. Listen anytime, anywhere.